Hello, I'm Kevin Berger, author of Atheism is Untenable, a book in which I argue why skeptical atheism crumbles beneath its own weight. On this channel, I don't engage in apologetics. Instead, I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists, of which, despite their claims to the contrary, there are many, including these, among others. This is Justified Nonetheless. If you enjoy or find my content interesting or informative, be sure to subscribe, turn on those notifications, like and share, and be sure to check out the Justified Nonetheless Patreon project for even more exclusive content. Hello, my little tumbleweeds. In this video, I'll be discussing a variety of topics relating to language and how it can sometimes be used by people in an intellectually dishonest way for some linguistic gymnastics. In my last video, I discussed the distinction between description and a definition and why that distinction matters. And in the course of that discussion, I made a passing reference to stipulative definitions as opposed to reportive or lexical definitions. So let's start with a clarification on that topic. Michael Gavin explains these on his channel in the following clips.
The two main kinds of definitions of this type are a stipulative definition and a lexical definition. And I think of these two as kind of extremes on a spectrum, where stipulative is a kind of one extreme and then lexical is the other. So let's start with the stipulative definition. A lot of times I think people think of stipulation when you think of a definition. It declares a meaning. So it declares what a word or phrase means. A lot of times it's going to be the first time the word or phrase appears. And the person just, is making it up and they just decide, this is how I'm going to use this word. So it can't be wrong. I can use the word however I want. So for example, let's say I come up with a new product. I come up with a shoe that has a little clock in the toe of the shoe, right? And I think this would be great. It'd look cool, have a little clock in there. And also you could look at if you're holding things in your hands, you can't take out your phone and see what time it is. You can just kind of hold up your foot and look down at it and say, oh, it's afternoon, I gotta go. So I come up with this thing. I designed this shoe with the clock in it, and I have to come up with a name for it. So I say it's going to be called Ora Scarpa. So Ora Scarpa is a shoe with the clock in it. Now, it can't be wrong. Nobody can tell me that's not what Ora Scarpa really means. It means this other thing. That's ridiculous. I just decided that that's what it means.
Gavin also indicates that while a stipulative definition cannot be wrong per se, it can be problematic. Pay attention to this.
On the other hand, it could be misleading, especially if somebody declares a new meaning for a word that already means something else, right? Which is kind of a strange thing to do, but I guess, people could do it. If I say, I want you to come over to my house and I'm going to make some chicken, and then you come over and you're eating this stuff and you say, well, this, is the strangest chicken that I've ever had. And I say, oh, I forgot to tell you. Right. I use the word chicken, see, in a different way. When I say chicken, I always mean human flesh. And that's just how I use the word, right? Technically, is that an incorrect use of the word? Well, I can stipulate that I use this word in a different way. It's kind of strange because it seems to be defeating the point of language. So it's kind of a strange thing to do. But I guess technically it's not incorrect. It's misleading though. And then
an obvious example of a stipulative definition is that of atheism. Within some philosophical circles, the word atheism is used to denote an active belief in the non-existence of any deity. However, most atheists use the term to refer to an absence of belief in any deity. There's nothing inherently wrong with using the term in that way, as long as everyone is clear as to what is being conveyed. That being said, and this is my continued point of contention, because beliefs are neurological states, by defining atheism in this way, one is implicitly claiming that a neurological distinction between not believing in deities and believing that there are none exists in reality, and subsequently incurs a burden of proof for that claim. I repeat, a person who expresses non-belief does not incur a burden of proof for the non-existence of a deity because they're not making that claim. The burden of proof incurred is for the claimed neurological distinction between non-belief in deities and belief to the contrary. But I digress. Gavin goes on to explain what a lexical or reportive definition is in the following way.
And then the other extreme is a lexical example, or a lexical definition. And a lexical definition instead of declaring a meaning, it's trying to describe an existing meaning. So we have a word or phrase, it already means something, and normally we're going to be talking about a word or phrase with origins in ordinary language. So when words arise in ordinary language, how that process works, you might think, well, it probably starts as a stipulative definition, right? And then somehow it becomes standard usage. But it may be more murky than that, because when you look at recent arrivals in terms of words, look at the word selfie, right? Recently, the Oxford English Dictionary, the Webster's Dictionary, all the main dictionaries, they include the word selfie now. How did that become a word, selfie? Where did it come from? Was there like a stipulation? Was there a moment when someone, put maybe a video out there on the internet or a page, a web page, and they declared, I have invented a word, selfie, and here's what it means exactly, and they stipulated that? I don't think that's quite how that happens. No, there's this kind of murky process where somehow or another somebody starts using the word, and then somebody else picks up on that. They never really officially declare maybe what it means. So they have this murky origin, and these types of words typically are the kind of words that we see lexical definitions for. And if you look up words in the dictionary's definitions are almost all lexical. They're never stipulative. There's some other types that we'll talk about, but they're mostly lexical definitions. Dictionary writers try to figure out how ordinary people are using words, or if they're specialists in some cases, they may try to figure out how specialized communities are using words, and then they try to describe that.
This idea of lexical definition leads us to prescriptivism versus descriptivism, and for that we will turn to Corey Stamper, a lexicographer from Merriam-Webster's Dictionary.
So there are two main approaches to language. One is prescriptivism and one is descriptivism. Prescriptivism essentially promotes what is called the best practices of English. Prescriptivism, by its nature, is exclusionary. Descriptivism, on the other hand, as an approach to language, it follows where language goes. Dictionaries exist on more of the descriptivist end of the spectrum. Dictionaries record the language as it is used, not as you think it should be used.
Now that we've covered stipulative definitions versus lexical definitions and prescriptivism versus descriptivism, we have a foundation for understanding a couple of logical fallacies regarding definitions. First, we'll hear from Dave Rowlands, also known as Trolley Dave.
Because it is the simplest and most common example of this that I see them commit. Whenever the conversation about the definition of atheism arises, this fallacy is generally committed. This fallacy is the appeal to definition fallacy, or the argument from definition fallacy, or the argentum ad dictionarium fallacy. It comes by a few different names, but they all describe the same error in reasoning. The appeal to definition fallacy is pretty self-explanatory, but you know me, I like to be both verbose and thorough, so I'll explain what it means. The appeal to definition fallacy is when, during an argument, we pull out a dictionary, point to the definition in the dictionary, and say, see, the way you're using the word is wrong. This is what the word means. And while it's absolutely fine to claim that the dictionary definition shows what a word can mean, arguing that it means only what that particular definition in that particular dictionary says is an error in reasoning. This is because dictionaries are descriptive. They describe how a word is commonly used and generally describe how a word is used in the domain the dictionary exists in.
And now we'll hear from Michael de Souza Cruz regarding another common fallacy involving definitions.
Definist fallacy. Defining a term in a biased manner. Loaded terms, making a concept seem inherently bad. Hoping that the listener will accept the provided definition, which makes the argument difficult to refute. Think. Taxes are government stealing from the public. The Socratic fallacy.
Okay, let's put this all together. A person can stipulate a definition for a term. However, if the definition stipulated is for the express purpose of advancing an argument, this results in the commission of a definist fallacy. A common example of this is defining the term God as a magical, anthropomorphic, and moral sky daddy. This is fallacious because there are interpretations of deities that are not anthropomorphic, that are not immortal, that are not held to reside in the sky or the heavens, that are not father figures, and so on. The same can be said of the term supernatural and defining it as fake, fantasy, imaginary, immeasurable, impossible, metaphysical, mythical, and so on. In both cases, these terms already have existing definitions, and skeptics invent their own definitions for them anyway, so that they can then argue against those definitions. Conversely, If one cherry picks a definition from among multiple possible definitions for the express purpose of advancing an argument, one is instead committing an appeal to definition fallacy. This is why I generally use the primary entry unless I have a legitimate reason to deviate from that. One such example is the definition of the word God, specifically when it's used in the general sense of the word, because the primary entry typically used is synonymous with the deity of the Abrahamic faiths as a substitute for Adonai, Jehovah, or Yahweh. The last topic we'll discuss is denotation versus connotation. Why call it a god is not a valid question. No justification is required for calling something a god beyond the definition of the term as denoted in the dictionary, because dictionaries are records of the conventions adopted for the usage of terms. Why call a platypus a mammal when it has bird-like traits and reptile-like characteristics like a bill, webbed feet, and laying eggs? Because it fits the definition of a mammal, meaning it nurtures its young with milk produced by mammary glands. Everything else is tangential. The connotations of giving birth to live young, having hair, and having sweat glands are separate. These are typical of mammals, however, they aren't what make mammals mammals. Because they are what comes to mind when one thinks of a mammal, they are the connotations. If one objects to the usage of a term because of the perceived connotations, one has already smuggled the baggage because the connotations are the baggage. With all that in mind, remember, even if your beliefs aren't necessarily true, they should be justified nonetheless.